There's an enormous difference between reacting and responding. Reactivity is a dangerous, reflexive action taken based on first impressions, while responsiveness is a thoughtful, meaningful engagement based on reflection and consideration. Who hasn't displaced their anger onto an easy target in a moment of reactivity? It's easy to mistake something or someone's proximity to a problem as the problem itself. The priesthood of the Torah was precisely in the business of managing this impulse amongst the Israelites. And for Aaron the high priest, you shall make a diadem of pure gold and engrave upon it, holy to Adonai. And it shall be on Aaron's forehead, that Aaron may bear off any avon hakodashim from the holy things that the Israelites consecrate. Avon hakodashim means something close to guilt of things set apart for God. In order for something to become set apart for God, the Israelites would have to make sure it was fit, in Hebrew kosher, an unblemished animal, for instance. Aware that there was no way to know for sure whether an offering was fully fit, the priests had to act as a buffer, taking on the guilt, in Hebrew avon, of any possible mistake as part of their duty in the temple. Through animal sacrifices, the priests offset the avonot, the guilt, of any given object or creature that was being consecrated, made kadosh, or holy, to the temple. The priesthood, and this particular role that they inhabited, still bears striking importance for the Jewish people today. Just a couple of weeks ago, we read in the Torah, when God descended to Sinai, God said to the people, "You will become for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Millennia away from the temple of the priesthood, we Jews today are God's kingdom of priests. We are the living fulfillment of this promise made at Sinai. This means we have the capacity to serve a function amongst the nations parallel to that of the priests of the temple. What would it mean to bear off avonot today? The Zohar, the medieval mystical text at the core of the Kabbalah, sees our role as a kingdom of priests, ones who transmute and elevate the substance of the world. Upon attempting to enter the heavenly realm, a voice asks one of the rabbis of the Zohar, "Who among you turns darkness into light, bitter into sweet, before arriving here?" The high priest accomplished just this by bearing away avonot through ritual sacrifice, giving the Israelite people a visceral representation of absolution of their mistakes through the killing of an animal. We today do this through the practice of tefillah, the Jewish version of prayer focused on contemplation of God's highest values and intercession on behalf of ourselves and others by appealing to these values. This practice was invented by the rabbis of old as a new way to accomplish the same ends as the sacrificial cult. It gives us the opportunity to slow down, to decide not to react quickly and reflexively to darkness and bitterness, but to respond by discerning and absolving those things tainted by avon, or guilt, into holy things in consonance with our highest values. Through contemplating the poetry of the Siddur, of the Jewish prayer book, we can reinterpret the darkness and bitterness in the world around us into light and sweetness. We can find the presence of God in those moments that are most difficult and most painful. We need only slow down and use the words of our ancestors to separate out the avonot from the kedusha, the guilt from the holiness. This intensely personal process requires us to be present with ourselves, to feel the pain and the difficulties that we are experiencing, and to find a way to remove that avon that darkness, that bitterness, that guilt or negativity by way of responding thoughtfully rather than reactively. Just as this practice can transform us internally, it too can be used to transform the external world. When we act reflexively to perceived avonot in the world around us, we shut down our capacity to be a priestly nation. When we react to a headline rather than reading an article, when we accept a narrative that feeds our fear rather than investigating it from a place of Kedusha, we bring our own avonot in. When we take the time to slow down and respond, to experience our inner emotions closely, to understand them, and rather than project them on the closest or easiest target, investigate our root sources, we are able to separate the avon from the kadosh, transmuting indistinct blend of darkness into clear light. Today, anti-Semitism is on the rise worldwide, and the Jewish community is on the defensive. Questions around the relationship between critics of Israel and anti-Semitism bubble under the surface at all times, leading to fear, leading to darkness and bitterness. Yet it is our mission as the Jewish people to not be overtaken by this fear, this darkness, or this bitterness. Much blame can be laid at the feet of our tweet-a-minute culture, of the news cycle that eats up these reactive situations, drawing our attention so that it can be monetized by the ads interspersed within the news. But we must take our mission seriously. We must not allow the avonot and the kedusha to remain blended. We must transmute the avonot into kedusha. We must turn the darkness into light and the bitter into the sweet. This means that when we see or hear of someone being accused of anti-Semitism, we must distance ourselves from the reactionary tendency to take these accusations at face value, and we must investigate the actual content of their speech and their actions for ourselves. When the terrors of the past are stoked today, when those intergenerational traumas of our ancestors are evoked and displaced into our contemporary world, the fear and pain that cloud our minds lead us to be much more liable to let those avonot slip through along with the kedusha. Just as the high priest clarified the offerings of the Israelites through the act of sacrifice, allowing the Israelites to rest easy, knowing that mistakes they made would be forgiven, we too must clarify the world around us. We can use the tool of tefillah, of reminding ourselves of our highest values and the strength that resides within them, handed down by the rabbis of old to clarify the avonot of our day, rather than being carried away by an incendiary headline or a thoughtless tweet. With this strength and clarity, we can not only read through the lines of inflammatory words to the reality hidden underneath, we can also engage in conversation with those identified as bearers of avonot, clarifying for ourselves and others the guilt from the holiness. This is hard and trying work, but it ought to be. It is the work of priests. May each of us learn to be these priests in our world, turning our own experiences of avon, of darkness and bitterness, into opportunities for redemption, helping create buffers between avonot and the people of the world in an attempt to bring everyone closer to God and our highest values. May we live up to the prophecy that we are to be a holy nation and spread Kedusha throughout the world. Shabbat Shalom.